It's really great for me to be here again. This is, as Inga said, this is the third in this series of 7. And so I will kind of recap on some of the points from the previous 2, because we don't expect everyone will have been to all of them, and just so that everyone can hopefully understand everything. And I'd just like to pick up on a comment that Lolita made there, that one of the fantastic things about sustainable development and global citizenship education is that it covers both of the things that Lolita was talking about, that we can't just be focused on our local challenges, because ultimately that can just mean that people are really, really selfish. It doesn't actually change anything. We also have to think about the impact of our choices on others, whether those are nearby in our community, in our country, or on the other side of the world through the decisions that we make. And that's really one of the great foundations for global citizenship education, which I'll talk about today. And so just as a recap again, I wrote this guide last year, basically just to try to help museums get started with the Sustainable Development Goals. You can get it for free from the link that is shown there. And so this one will cover, so in that guide, I came up with a kind of really simple model of 6 activities that museums can do to plan how they can contribute to sustainability and sustainable development. And really 7 key activities that are, you could think of them as the activities that museums all pretty much, more or less all of them do. And to think of these almost a bit like channels on the television, that these are your channels, these are your channels for realizing activity for sustainable development. And I'll talk about the second one today. But the thing to say as well is that although it shows these 7 separately, they're all really interconnected, they relate to one another. And that's a good thing as well. So what are we going to cover today? I thought we would talk about, well, how does education relate to human rights? Because sustainable development is a rights-based agenda. It's about reducing inequality among and between people and between countries. And it's about trying to create a rights-based system where everyone benefits. And then I'll talk about how education features in the Sustainable Development Goals, and then how museums can use education for sustainable development and global citizenship education, bit of a mouthful, as educational approaches. And those are 2 particular pedagogies, kind of learning approaches, which I'll explain later. So education is a human right, and one of the things that museums, I think it's fair to say, often don't realize is that they're really very strongly connected with people's rights. So some of the things that museums do by choice, that they think they do by choice, people also are entitled to those things. And so these are some of the articles from the Universal Declaration for Human Rights from 1948. And I've just picked out the ones that relate most closely to education. So everyone has a right to life, to liberty and security of person. That means that they are entitled to know about the challenges and the threats that they or their property might face. And we might think about that in relation to climate change or war or social conflict. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression, and that includes the right to information. And museums are very closely associated with the right to information because they are, by a large part, information and knowledge-based institutions. There is a separate right to education, Article 26. I'll talk about a little bit more. And then arguably the one which is most closely associated with museums is this Article 27. Everyone has the right to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits, which again is a bit long. And I'll talk about that one more in the next webinar. But it's to say that everyone has the right to participate in cultural life, I think is a really interesting thing for museums to think about, because it doesn't say that everyone has the right to access cultural institutions. It says that, well, you know, everyone has the right to participate in cultural life. And so we can think about that almost the other way around. Rather than how do people get access to museums and similar institutions, it's how do museums and similar institutions support people to lead a cultural life? And that means that's been defined, you know, that everyone has the right to access their own culture, to know about their own culture, to know about the culture of others, and also to contribute to the cultural life of their community. And lastly, responsibility, that human rights are often slightly misunderstood in that they can be seen as the things that people are entitled to, but they're not just the things that each of us is entitled to, it's what everyone else is entitled to as well. So there is an article about responsibility. We all have a duty to other people and we should respect their rights and freedoms. And these are rights that apply, you know, they're agreed internationally. They've been the foundation for human rights law, national human rights laws since the late 40s, after the horrors of the Second World War, to try to make sure that they never happened again. And then I just thought I'd say just a few words, because we're talking about education, there are, of course, the three styles of education. Although it's to say, of course, there are the three styles of education, it's also fair to say that there's quite a lot of disagreement about where the separations lie. So we could think of formal education, education that's institutionalized, that basically makes up the formal education and qualification system of a country. It mostly consists, it's the simple way to think about it is it relates to schools and college and to university. But we could also think of vocational education, special needs education, and some parts of the adult education system. They're also seen as being part of formal education. This is a very standard definition. So as I say, there are different definitions. Non-formal education is less clear. It's an alternative, an addition or an alternative or a complement to formal education within the process of lifelong learning of people. And it typically is delivered in short courses or workshops or seminars. It mostly leads to qualifications that might not be kind of formally recognized in the same way as school or university. And I think it's fair to say that that would include driving lessons, music lessons and sports classes. And the last one is the one that museums are most closely associated with. It's informal learning. It takes place in the family, in the workplace, in local community and daily life on a self-directed, family-directed or socially directed basis. So I think it's fair to say that museums are involved in all three of those kinds in different ways. And that's also one of the things which is a bit unusual about museums, that usually you'd have an institution that delivers formal education or non-formal or informal. Museums combine all three together. And I just thought I'd say a few words about how education is already recognised in the international agreements that are supposed to help deliver human rights. So if we take this one, the International Convention for Elimination of Racial Discrimination is old. It's 60 plus years old. It was put together in the age of the civil rights movement, and it talks about the importance of adopting immediate and effective measures, particularly in the fields of teaching, education, culture, and information, to combat prejudices which lead to racial discrimination and to promoting understanding, tolerance, and friendship among nations and racial or ethnic groups. And that relates to what Lolita was talking about before. How can we foster people to have a strong sense of their own identity and difference, but also tolerance and for others, and the ability to accept difference? And so what would some of the things that museums can do to support this? Well, really obviously would be about teaching on cultural and ethnic diversity, drawing on collections, teaching on historic and contemporary intolerance, not just in your own place, but maybe further afield, using your collections as a kind of stimulus, and to combat prejudice and stereotypes of all kinds in educational programs. They should have no place in a museum. If we take another one, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which again internationally agreed, including by Latvia, this includes quite a specific reference to what education should include for children. It should prepare them for life, responsible life in a free society, in the spirit of understanding, peace, tolerance, equality of the sexes, and friendship among all peoples, ethnic, national, and religious groups and persons of indigenous origin, and respect for nature, for the natural environment. And so I just thought I'd point these out to say that these high-level international agreements, they already recognize the importance of education, and that's really a space that museums could very helpfully occupy. But to say as well that education is not just something that is related to school. Education relates across life. And this was a recommendation from UNESCO from 2015 about adult learning education. And they kind of categorized three main forms. Firstly, literacy and numeracy, basic skills. Professional, and we might think of that first one as particularly relevant for people who are marginalized, people with special needs, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and homeless people, and really the most marginalized people in society. Professional development and training, which ensures that people continue to have skills for work that helps keep them in productive professions and work. And lastly, community or informal education, which I know is a bit long, but I'll read it anyway because it's nice, it's good, it's very much like in the previous slide from the rights of the child. So informal education, which empowers people to actively engage with social issues such as poverty, gender, intergenerational solidarity, social mobility, justice, equity, exclusion, violence, unemployment, environmental protection, and climate change. It also helps people to lead a decent life in terms of health and well-being, culture, spirituality, and in all other ways that contribute to personal development and dignity. And that is ultimately what we're concerned about in all of this. Sustainable development is about ensuring that everyone can live in dignity, accepting that the needs of those who are left behind need to be addressed first, accepting that people in faraway circumstances, we also have a responsibility to them. And so it speaks very, very much to what Lolita mentioned before in the introduction. And to say again that, to return to, this is something I introduced in the previous slides, that sustainable development is really about thinking about these capitals, what we could call capitals. And we might be familiar with the idea of a capital in a bank account, where we have the capital and we try to accrue some interest and we live off the interest. But to say that we can think about multiple capitals in society, so human capital, social capital, our relationships, our strong communities, our families, the social structures that actually bind society together. And lastly, on the right-hand side, the natural capital, the wild places, the nature, which underpins all of our survival. And in talking about education, we're talking about social capital, the left-hand one, the blue circle there. But education, that in the same way that these things are really tied together in every way you can imagine. Social capital is actually what builds economic capital and helps protect natural capital. So it's really important. And so the big program to support education for sustainable development and sustainable development as a whole is this Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. Agenda 2030 was developed through a really big consultation exercise over about 2 or 3 years, and it runs from 2015 until 2030. It was developed as a consultation exercise across lots of sectors. So although people talk about them as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, they're really society's Sustainable Development Goals. And if you're not familiar with it already, I really recommend you have a read of the vision and the introduction in Transforming Our World, because it's very inspirational, it's fantastic. And And the way that it sees that vision being achieved is through these 17 Sustainable Development Goals on the right-hand side, which you might be familiar with. And it has to be said that people might be, if you're familiar with the goals without understanding transforming our world, it doesn't really make sense. The goals were agreed as the 17 really big kind of topics or areas or challenges that if they could be dealt with, that is how the vision of transforming our world would be achieved. And one of the reasons I mentioned the conventions previously is that these conventions, human rights conventions, and the Rio conventions for nature, those have been around for years, and they all mention the importance of education and participation and community involvement. But because they were in a kind of old style of diplomacy, it kind of didn't reach to practitioners like museums. The goal-based approach, like the Sustainable Development Goals uses, is absolutely fantastic because it makes it much easier to think, okay, here's a goal. Who else is interested in this goal? What goals am I concerned about? What goals can I help? And so it just works much more easily. It's absolutely fantastic. And so just to say here that education, which we're talking about today, has its own goal. It's number 4 there. It looks like a pen in a book. Quality education. But it's recognised that education is really crucial for all 17. So we can think about education just within Goal 4, or we can think about it in relation to all of them. So Goal 2, zero hunger, good nutrition and well-being, and sustainable agriculture. What kind of education is needed to support that? It doesn't all need to fit within Goal 4. And so I'll talk through Goal 4 in detail though, because it has a number of particular targets in it, which are really relevant to museums. And I think the thing to say, as I've said in the previous webinars, is that the goals aren't supposed to be used like a kind of tick list or a kind of bingo list where you think, oh, we're good at this one, I'm good at this one, and I'm good at that one, but I'll ignore those ones because I'm not very good at them. That's not quite how it works. We have to think about, well, where are our strengths and how can we build on our strengths? But where are our weaknesses and how do we address our weaknesses as well? That's how sustainable development works. It's about doing more good stuff and doing less bad stuff. That's how we gradually move our contribution over time. And so the 17 goals here are really the high level goals. Even the titles that are on the icons don't really do them justice. We'll have a look at the next one. So this is Goal 4, and you can see it just says quality education. Quality education about what? The full title is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. It's much broader, much more specific. And then within this goal, there are 10 targets. And each of the goals has targets, and the targets are actually the really practical bits. They're where I'd suggest you focus your efforts. And so I'll go through these, not all of them for Goal 4. And so we could look at the icon there. It looks like a school, but it doesn't have to be a school. So if we think, well, by 2030, to ensure all boys, girls and boys complete free, equitable and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. And what I suggest that we all do, is we just think, well, what can we do that helps support that goal? Can we reasonably support that goal? For museums, I would say definitely. Many of you are already doing it because you work with primary and secondary schools. But it's also looking about well, what is the content of the learning? How can museums provide something distinctive that supports these relevant and effective learning outcomes? If I move to 4.2. So some of the targets in Goal 4 are about different age groups or different groups of people. Other ones are about the actual content of education. So if target 4.2 is to ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care and pre-primary education, so they're ready for primary education. So this is talking about preschool. Many museums do support preschool activities, whether those are learning activities or they're just part of family days, and being open to families and so on. Target 4.3 is about ensuring that equal access, and some of the words in these are particularly important. So it's about the equal access for all women and men to affordable and quality technical, vocational and tertiary education, including university. So this is about preparing people for work. This is about skills for work, but that happen before they enter work. So what does this mean for museums? Well, I think it means supporting placements and training for teenagers and students, but not only teenagers and students, ensuring adults can develop skills related to either the museum profession or how museums can support the development of skills for other professions like design, creativity and design, or art, for just to make up some examples. And then 4.4 is different because it's, whereas 4.3 is around skills for work before people enter work, this is about ensuring people in work continue to develop their skills. And we see this, just to go to, again, to make up an example, that if we take the COVID crisis, has really changed the way that a lot of museums are looking to do things. So it might mean that people who work in museums are going to need to have additional skills, and it's going to be up to their employer to support them to do that, because as responsible employers. And then 4.5 is around eliminating basically the barriers that exist between among different groups to access education. For people who are maybe with disabilities or Indigenous people or children in vulnerable situations. So it's around having special educational provision that caters for them, that ensures that they're not left behind. Um, 4.6 is around basic literacy and numeracy. And again, what that might mean is targeted support for working with particular educational providers who might be working with refugees or asylum seekers or people with special educational needs, or who are marginalized for any of many other reasons. And then this last one, again, looks like it's the image there very much suggests a school to build and upgrade inclusive and safe schools. But if we read the title, it's to build and upgrade educational facilities, which I would say includes museums, to be child, disability and gender sensitive and provide safe, non-violent, inclusive and effective learning environments for all. And what I would say with this is, although it's, as is suggested in the image there, it looks like it's making buildings, and building and upgrading educational facilities to be safe, non-violent and inclusive is also about the culture of these organizations, the things that they say, the way that they work with people, the way they treat people. So it's not just about bricks and mortar, it's about relationships and approaches to working with people as well. And then a really important one is this one. This is target 4.7. Is really, this is dealing with the content of learning, of education. And I think this is such an important one for museums. By 2030, so it's got a specific date, to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. And what I would say, what does this mean for museums? I would really very much encourage you to just think about, well, of your existing programs, how do they support that? Or how could they support that? because it's an absolutely fantastic area for museums to focus on. It's so much in line with what museums, so many of them, try to do. And Target 407 is linked with two other ones. There are two others that are very specific about learning. So goal 12 is about sustainable production and consumption, which is a huge problem in the global north. And it has this target to ensure that people everywhere have the relevant information and awareness for sustainable development and lifestyles in harmony with nature. It's very much like the previous one. And again, use this as a guide for your programs. And finally, goal 13 is about taking urgent climate action, because climate change is a huge, massive challenge that will change everything as it bites harder and harder. And it has a target to improve education and awareness raising and human and institutional capacity on climate change, mitigation, which is reducing climate release of greenhouse gases, adaptation, which is learning to live with the impacts of climate change, impact reduction and early warning. And again, it's such a, we all know that climate change is a huge challenge. Here's a target that's kind of crying out for help. Museums are educational institutions with unique resources. They surely have a part to play in this. They really can help. And so if we take these two learning approaches, education for sustainable development and global citizenship education, are both rolled into Target 4.7, which I spoke about before. So ESD, as it's called for short, it empowers learners to take informed decisions and responsible actions for environmental integrity, economic viability, and a just society for present and future generations, while respecting cultural diversity. While global citizenship education aims to empower learners of all ages to assume active roles, so again, speaking very much to what Lolita was talking about, both locally and globally, in building more peaceful, tolerant, inclusive and secure societies. Sounds great. I don't know about you, but I think it sounds absolutely fantastic. And UNESCO uses a particular model for learning, which again is fantastic. They talk about the importance of all three, of thinking, feeling and doing. So you can think about it as heads, hearts and hands. They say that to be effective, learning has to have some information content. It has to relate to your, it has to touch you in terms of attitudes and values, but it also needs to enable you to do something. And learning that includes all three is what they propose is most likely to make a difference. And I have to say that I really agree with that. So thinking this is for global citizenship education, to acquire knowledge and understanding and critical thinking about issues. In terms of feeling, is to have a sense of belonging to a common humanity, to basically to care. And doing, to act effectively and responsible at local, national and global levels for a more peaceful and sustainable world. And so I really strongly recommend this thinking, feeling and doing model, because I think it's excellent. And so I just thought I'd mention a couple of resources that are available, rather than me talk through the Sustainable Development Goals and how you can deal with each one, because there are lots of resources available that can do it justice, much more than I can in a short webinar. So this document was produced by UNESCO a few years ago, and it gives you learning objectives for each of the Sustainable Development Goals. And just as an example, on the right-hand side here, it shows the learning objectives for Goal 13 on climate action. So it's got the cognitive learning objectives, those are the thinking ones. Socio-emotional are the feeling or attitude-based ones, and behavioral objectives are the skills-based ones. So it's, as I mentioned, it's about thinking, feeling and doing. It's absolutely fantastic resource. I really recommend it to all of you. And another one was also done by UNESCO, and it's specific to global citizenship education. And it's also excellent because it sets out a kind of curriculum across the life course, you know, for this age group, what kind of topics might you be covering relating to global citizenship education. It's really great. And I've got the references at the end of this webinar. And so just to give you some examples from Latvian museums, because partly they're very nice, it gives a chance to show some of the great work that's happening in Latvian museums, and also to try to join the dots between some of these more theoretical, the model based of what the goals and targets are and what people are actually doing. And so this is it's called the Art Detective Program for preschool and junior school children, not based on language, exploring art at the Madoana Local History and Art Museum. And so I would say that these two people looking at this picture, doing this activity, that's actually contributing to at least 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's about free primary and secondary education. It's about access to quality preschool activity. And also this one I've added in, target 10.2 is about promoting inclusion. So involving children from a young age in museums and so on, tries to involve them in society and you know, it invites them in is a really good thing, because I can remember when museums really weren't that welcoming to children. That's going back quite a long time now. Or we have a family day linked to the work of Julius Maderniks at the Museum of Decorative Arts and Design. And this relates to at least 3 targets again. So we can relate it to education for sustainable development and global citizenship, because it's about involving people with their own culture. It's again promoting social, economic and political inclusion, because it's inviting people in, and it helps people to understand their own culture and cultural heritage, and that helps protect it, which is the subject of target 11.4. Then at the Andreas Uptis Memorial Museum, sorry if I've not said that correctly, so school pupils try out traditional writing, and you can see one of them's holding I think an old pen from the museum collection, and then others are using pens in the same way to create these bookmarks to take away. So again, this relates to the same targets I mentioned previously, because for the same targets, there may be, you know, many thousands, millions of different ways to support them, but they will be different for each museum and for each activity. And then this is a program run by the Museum of the Occupation of Latvia in Riga. And so this is taking school pupils out to learn about the conflict between Latvia and the USSR in 1991 in a series of conflicts called the Barricades. So again, here we have people learning about human rights and peace, which relates to target 4.7. But this also relates very much to some of the targets in goal 16 is about peace and justice. So it's aiming to reduce violence everywhere, to help people understand the problems of war and conflict, around promoting the rule of law and ensuring everyone has equal access to justice. And also, importantly, when things relate to war and conflict in countries, this relates very much to target 16.10. Although it says there it's about ensure public access to information, this last bit is really important to protect fundamental freedoms. Basically means to support human rights, which are a huge, massive topic. So you can see that each of these targets, they cover a huge area of things of importance. Just a few more. So here we have school pupils at the Praley History and Applied Art Museum, which has a park that's a couple of 100 years old. And so the school pupils learn about the nature and the ponds and the canals, and they explore how it's changed over time. So this helps to, again, explore target 4.7, but also these other targets related to sustainability and nature that I mentioned around target 12.8. Target 11.7 is about ensuring people have access to safe and inclusive green and public spaces. And I would say that although it looks like everything there is outside, I would say that public spaces also includes museums. Lastly there, target 15.1 is about conserving and restoring terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. So the more people can understand the impacts that people are having on nature, the more empowered they are to do something about it. Just a few more examples. Here we have, as I say, learning is not something that stops at school or university. So here we have adults taking part in an art course with lectures and practical experience at the Latvian National Museum of Art. And I just thought I'll just mention 3 of these targets here, because I've mentioned 4.7 a lot. So eliminating all discrimination in education is also about ensuring that people have opportunities to learn throughout life, and older people are often forgotten about in this. And to promote universal inclusion, that includes involving adults and older people. And similarly in target 11.7, it also specifies, it's really important to make sure that public spaces are welcoming and offer programs relevant to all people. Excuse me a second. And then this is the last example. So this is at the McGhie Local History and Art Museum again. And so here we have people, older people, playing what you could call a serious game. It's not really a game at all. It's to help understand urban planning in the McGhie region. And this is, to me, is a fantastic example, because it's not just about education, it's about participation, it's about ensuring people's opinions and voices are heard, that they understand the policies and developments that are taking place that might impact them. And this relates to lots of targets. So around inclusive urbanization means involving people. These can help reduce the adverse effects of natural disasters by learning from the past and ensuring that losses are minimized, and that would include losses of cultural property. I'll just mention target 11B there is about something called disaster risk reduction. It's about reducing the impact of disasters on society. And lastly, the 2 targets there are about supporting society to meet the challenge of climate change, both to adapt to it and to help people understand what they can do as we face the challenge. And so here are a lot of resources. The top 2 are the really fantastic documents that I spoke about, the UNESCO Learning Objectives and the Global Citizenship Education Topics documents. UNESCO has lots of resources on education around the Sustainable Development Goals, far more than I can talk about here. If you're interested in understanding the learning dimensions, the thinking, feeling and doing, that's at the 4th reference there. There's a really extensive portal of resources that you can explore. It looks like the 17 SDGs, and you choose the one that you're interested in. Similarly, there's something called the Global Citizenship Clearinghouse, which has lots of resources. And the last one is this absolutely brilliant report, which you can actually get for free as a PDF, is from 2016, is the Global Education Monitoring Report. And this one was about education and sustainable development. It's absolutely excellent. And it's got sections in it on Latvia. And that's the end of my lecture. So thank you, and I hope you found that interesting. And similarly, I really wish you a happy new year and all the best for your work this year and beyond. So thank you.